the afternoon or for the next hour or so, we're going to be performing a shortened version of Our Town, Greendale. It is the vehicle that helped us win this wonderful award from the state of Wisconsin. And we're going to give you a 20-minute little part of the play. And then I will certainly introduce you to our honored guest from Madison with our award. Thank you.
Welcome to Our Town, Greendale, Wisconsin. Please join us as we journey back to the 1930s. It was the Great Depression, and Franklin Roosevelt was president. The country was desperate for change, and for some, that change would be found near farmland just a few miles from the city of Milwaukee. It would be called Greendale, and by 1938, it would be the new hometown for hundreds of young families. How that came to be is the story we're going to tell this afternoon. You will hear from the earliest Greendale residents, the pioneers, as recorded in the book Greendale Remembered. It's in their own words, and they will tell it what it was like to be a Greendale pioneer. It took a woman with strong ideas and the determination to make sure it happened just the way it was planned. That woman was, of course, Eleanor Roosevelt. It makes sense that the first person we talked to was FDR's eyes, ears, and legs, his wife Eleanor.
I visited the Greendale Resettlement Project, and it is a wonderful site. I wish, however, that every group of architects would have a woman at their elbow so that they could advise on such details as the proper placing of things, which the woman uses daily to get her work done. These details may seem insignificant, but they make all the difference in the world with the ease at which the work can be accomplished, and therefore the happiness of the woman in the house.
Well, here you see a young family checking into one of those model homes. We'll go inside one of the houses in just a minute. I wonder who that young mother is at the front door with those kids.
Monroe Arians and I became engaged in 1936. Those were the Great Depression days. The Milwaukee Journal was full of exciting news that Milwaukee would be one of 3 sites that the federal government, under President Roosevelt, had chosen to build Greenbelt towns for middle-income people. The work would be done with WPA labor to create jobs for the unemployed. This was our dream.
This is how Our Town looks from the air. You know, of course, they had airplanes back then and they had cameras, but Greendale was out in the sticks. It was surrounded by farms.
When we had athletic events at other schools, they would be teasing us about coming from the country and being farmers. Well, never bothered us too much when we beat them. Go Greendale.
Well, why would people want to move out to Greendale? What was the attraction? For many, it was a chance for a new beginning, to get away from the crowded city and live in the country. As you can see here, thousands of city dwellers drove out to the sticks to view these new homes. The buildings in the background, that's where the workers were housed.
There was a lot of work for a lot of men. This was the Great Depression, and Greendale would play a small part in putting people back to work. It would be homes built by working men, for working men and their families. Laborers and skilled workers were hired by the hundreds. Greendale was hard to find back then, and some people say it still is today. The planners knew they would have to advertise, so they promoted Greendale as homes for working men. Could working men afford to live in Greendale? Did you know that all Greendale's pioneers rented their homes? from 1938 to 1952.
Well, let's talk about money for a second. The minimum wage in 1938, as you can see here, was 25 cents. Today, that quarter would be worth $5.71. But most workers in Greendale were paid much more. The income range to move into Greendale was a minimum of $2,000 a year, and the maximum was $3,500. If you were approved to move into Greendale, and you had to have a decent job during the Great Depression. Well, here's Irene Colross and Dora Arians to tell us about that part of the Greendale story.
If you earned too much money, you could not move into Greendale. Although if you didn't earn enough money, you couldn't move in either. It depended on what your earnings were for the type of house you would get.
In April 1938, the magical letter that we had said we could move into Greendale in May. That same day, though, my husband had a work cutback, which reduced his meager apprentice earnings from $65 a month to $48, less than the required minimum needed to move into Greendale. But the government allowed that at the completion of his apprenticeship, he would be earning a full salary of $150 a month. I was earning $30 a week as a credit union teller, but a wife's salary was not counted because it was assumed that a woman would quit work when she started a family.
Well, Dora, it looks like you manage your expenses quite well. This was communal living in Greendale. Notice how the whole block had one electric bill and they had to divide it up. The government owned all the homes and you applied to live here. Irene told us about how the government assigned each family a house. What about those houses? What were they like?
There was criticism of the structures themselves, not of the design layout. The project, as designed by engineers in Georgia, didn't understand that it would be cheaper to build a full basement, so there was criticism of the lack of basements.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And every place has its legends, and that's one of the legends about Greendale. The legend is that the builders, remember this was the federal government, mixed up the plans, and the other Greenbelt towns got our basements. It's a great story, but it's not true. It's like anything else. It was about the money. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. What Greendale did get on those solid foundations were sturdy syncrete block homes with clay tile roofs designed and built to last. This house is identical to the one the Greendale Historic Society bought and is now fully restored and insured, welcoming guests to Greendale. Well, as I said, Greendale was surrounded by farms, so the soil must have been good for gardens. Viola, could you please tell us folks about your Greendale garden?
Well, right where the high school is now, there was all farmland. Then the government plowed it up for individual gardens, big ones. There was a little creek flowing through there, and we used that water for our gardens. We had corn, potatoes, cabbage, everything. The only thing we had to watch out for were the pheasants. They loved the tomatoes. We worked hard on the garden. Gee, it was nice to get all that produce from our gardens.
So in 1938, when I was 10, my parents, Harry and Sylvia Whittle, were one of the first families to move into one of the single 3-bedroom original homes. Here's one of the classic Greendale originals. Some folks moving out in Milwaukee wanted a single home, so a lot were built just like this one. But a few of them were built a little differently. This has 1 bedroom, and it was called a honeymooner. Can anybody guess why?
Well, did I tell you that the government owned all the houses? Did I tell everybody that?
Yes,
All right.
yes.
Okay, when you applied to live here, and you were assigned a house to live in based on your moderate income and your family size. Well, what if the size of your family changed?
Well, my mom and dad and brother lived on Basswood Street in a 2-bedroom side by side. But the rule was if you had a boy and a girl, you had to move to a 3-bedroom house. So when I was born, we were asked to move to that 3-bedroom home. My mom still lives there today.
Well, there were those 2-family homes, but there were a lot of streets which consisted of a bunch of single-family homes that all looked identical. What could possibly go wrong?
There was a younger woman who lived with her mother. Her boyfriend was invited over to stop in, and when he opened the door and said, "Honey, I'm here," the older woman in a nightcap appeared at the top of the stairs. He had gone to the wrong house.
Well, that's a great story, Minnie, and thank you for sharing that. Minnie Prue lived in a Greendale original on Angle Lane until she passed away at the age of 103. Let's take a look inside one of those Greendale homes. Remember, Greendailers called them original.
Here is a typical living room, and it's just like ours at Apple Court, all built by those laborers and skilled workers with the best materials that the government could provide. The floors, the beamed ceiling, the solid core 6-panel doors made of Douglas fir. Let's hear it now from Jim Kendellen about his original home.
Our house included a refrigerator, electric stove, window shades, a furnace, and a small stove in the utility room to heat water when the furnace was not in use during the summer. Every home had a coal bin that held 1 ton of coal. The kitchen was rather simple, the sink was typical, but the appliances were all electric and came new with the home. It was a great pleasure to move into a new, clean home with all new appliances. For many from the city, this was a big improvement.
Well, thank you for that, Jim. Well, did I mention that everything was close by? You could walk to the stores and get all that you needed for dinner. The walking trails, which still exist, allowed anyone from Greendale in any spot to just take a 10-minute walk and be right down in the center of the village. So let's go shopping.
On Saturday mornings, the women went to the co-op not only for the excellent meat, but also to have fun with some of the people at the shop. It was really neat and served all our needs. Whitey was the butcher. They were such nice people. This is the butcher counter in the co-op grocery store. Check out those prices.
Think there was any better place in the world to grow up. The community as a whole, going to the drugstore, walking to the grocery store for your parents, standing in line. If you needed 35 cents and you had 34 cents, the person behind you would say, "Hey, Jimmy, here's a penny." Those were the kind of things that would happen.
Because Greendale was always a very close community. There was this closeness. There was nobody better than anyone else. We were all in the same income bracket. We made do with what we had, and everyone was happy.
I loved this village. I raised my family on Berry Court. We tried to be good neighbors. On weekends, we'd have bratwurst from Sheboygan and always have some kind of party on Berry Court. All the people in Greendale were very friendly and good neighbors. There was always a lot of togetherness and friendliness. We had lots of block parties and lots of fun.
Sure that there was lots of fun to be had. So they surveyed potential residents and they asked them what kind of things you wanted in Greendale. 1 out of 3 said they wanted a tavern. Remember, this is Milwaukee. The planners readily agreed and built a tavern.
Our town had a movie theater. If you had a quarter in your pocket, you could buy a ticket to the movies. They had a drawing at the theater. When you bought a ticket, You got a dish. A lot of people got a whole set.
Yes, it was our very own neighborhood theater. You could walk there and even meet up with that cute boy you met in study hall. Right, Ted?
Well, I see we're about out of time. Our short trip around our town of the 1930s is just about over. We heard from the pioneers in their own words, recollections of those who moved in first, shopped in the co-op grocery store, had block parties, and yes, some of them even died here. They told us that Greendale was built to provide jobs and homes and schools and stores for young families during the Great Depression. Isn't it amazing that we're still welcoming folks to Greendale 86 years after those houses were built? You know, in 2012, Greendale was designated a National Historic Landmark. Prior to that, we received a listing on the National Register of Historic Places. That's a lot of history, isn't it? And I think it's important that we have to know that. But it's also important, don't you think, that we know the daily life of people, how they really lived in Greendale? Like stories about Dora and Irene and how they worried about their budget, about how Viola was so proud of her garden. Those are the kind of things that people will remember. And of course, Jimmy needing that extra penny. That's important history too. So that's why we recorded all those loving memories in this book. And these are the words that our pioneers are reading today in the book, Greendale Remembered. We're reminded of the importance of the Greendale story, and it's important to our country's history. Thank you all today for coming, and thanks to our pioneers.